I came back from a long job out of state only to find 25 brand new storage units built on the vacant lot I inherited from my dad. The new HOA president, Karen, claimed I had given verbal approval to the board, except I had no idea any of this was even happening. When I confronted her, she brushed me off like I was just another complainer. But what she didn't know, and what would become her biggest mistake, was that I own a demolition company. And if there's one thing I know how to do better than anyone, it's remove things. Legally, cleanly, and with undeniable force. But this wouldn't just be about bulldozers and backhoes. It would turn into something much bigger. Because as I started digging through their paperwork, I discovered something Karen desperately wanted to keep buried. Something that would shake the entire neighborhood. When my father passed, the only thing he left me was a dusty, uneven patch of land on the edge of Oak Meadow. No house, no money, just a rectangular slice of earth lined with brittle fence posts and overgrown weeds. I used to joke that it was inherited dirt, but he loved that dirt. Said it was the one place no one could tell him what to do. Not the city, not the neighbors, and especially not the HOA that had slowly swallowed every other lot in the area like some overgrown weed itself. Growing up, that land was where I learned to swing a hammer. My dad built everything with his own hands. Chicken coops, tool sheds, even a makeshift basketball hoop made from a rusted bicycle rim. Nothing fancy, but it was real. It was his. The only thing he ever asked me to promise was that I wouldn't sell it off to some developer looking to throw up more beige boxes and call it progress. I kept that promise, even when money got tight. Even when neighbors told me I was wasting space that could be put to better use. To me, that lot wasn't just land. It was memory, and I wasn't about to let it go. So when I came back from that big industrial job up north, a 6-month contract tearing down an old textile plant, I expected to find the same scrubby weeds and weather-beaten fencing. Maybe a few more beer cans tossed over the back edge. What I didn't expect was to find my gate unlocked, the fence posts gone, and in their place, a row of crisp, identical storage units stretching the length of the property like shiny gray dominoes. At first, I thought I had the wrong lot. I pulled out the GPS on my phone, checked the survey pins my dad and I had marked years ago with orange ribbon and sweat. No mistake. This was my land. I sat in my truck with the engine running, staring at those units like they might vanish if I blinked hard enough. But they didn't. Instead, a shiny white SUV turned the corner and rolled up next to me. The driver, a woman with platinum blonde hair and a smug little smirk, rolled down her window and gave me a once-over like I was a stray animal too close to her garden. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone syrupy and sharp all at once. I just pointed to the units. "Yeah, you can tell me why someone built all this on my asterisk property." Her eyes flicked to my truck door, where the name of my company, Titan Demolition Services, was painted in bold black letters. I saw the twitch in her smile. Just a flicker. But it was there. "This is HOA land," she said crisply. "Approved by the board months ago. Perhaps you should check your records." I didn't answer her. I didn't have to, because in that moment I already knew what had happened. They thought I wouldn't notice. Thought I was just another absent landowner. Easy to steamroll. And maybe I would have been if I didn't happen to make a living tearing down things, exactly like the mess they just built. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. They had no idea what they'd just started. The wheels of my truck crunched slow over the gravel as I pulled up to the edge of my land. I hadn't been back in over 6 months, not since I took that job out in Arizona. A big commercial teardown, long days and longer nights, but the money was too good to pass up. I figured the lot would look just like I left it, quiet, sun-baked, maybe a few new weeds poking through the fence line. What I didn't expect was to see a perfect grid of steel doors, each one numbered and freshly painted, staring back at me like a line of soldiers standing at attention. I parked without thinking, engine idling as my brain struggled to catch up to my eyes. 25. I counted them. 25 identical storage units, all sitting on land that legally belonged to me. Concrete pads, security lighting, a chain-link perimeter fence I certainly hadn't authorized. The fence posts were new, shiny, anchored deep with poured footings. Someone had spent real money here, and not a single person thought to tell me about it. My boots hit the dirt with a thud. I walked the perimeter. Slow, dazed. Running my hand along the sharp metal corners like touching it would make sense. There was no graffiti, no rust, no wear. This wasn't some fly-by-night build. This had been planned, approved, and executed with speed. And all of it, on my land. I followed the boundary line back toward the road, where my dad's old property marker should have been. Gone. Replaced by a small white sign that read, Suncrest, HOA storage units, private property, no trespassing. The audacity nearly knocked the wind out of me. That's when I noticed the security camera bolted above the corner unit, its lens slowly tracking me as I moved, watching me, like I was the one trespassing. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was surreal. I'd just come off a job where we'd torn down a 70-year-old mill brick by brick, and yet here I was, unable to wrap my head around someone building on my asterisk land. I pulled out my phone and snapped pictures. Every angle, every marker, every inch of concrete. My lot had changed while I was gone, and whoever changed it had no idea who they were messing with. I didn't have to ask around long to find out who was behind the sudden makeover of my land. Her name came up in every conversation, whispered like she was royalty or a curse, depending on who was speaking. Karen Whitaker, newly elected president of the Suncrest HOA, moved in just over a year ago and had apparently been climbing the neighborhood ranks ever since. I hadn't even known the HOA had ranks, but according to one neighbor, Karen turned board meetings into power plays and Christmas decorations into code violations. I caught her 2 days later, strutting across the gravel lot in nude heels and a pressed white blouse that didn't have a speck of dust on it, despite walking a construction site. Her sunglasses were designer, oversized, and probably more expensive than the fence they installed around my land. Well, she said, stopping with one hand on her hip, you must be the man with the concerns. I didn't smile. It's my property. She gave a quick little chuckle, the kind people use when they want to appear gracious while insulting you. Yes, well, it's a little more complicated than that now, isn't it? No, I said flatly. It's not. She gestured toward the units like she was unveiling a prize. The board voted unanimously on the expansion project. Storage was our #1 resident complaint. You gave verbal approval last fall, according to meeting notes. My jaw tightened. I wasn't at any meeting. I was in New Mexico, tearing down a mining facility. Karen tilted her head like she was listening to a child explain why they didn't do their homework. That's not what the minutes say. You spoke with Greg Hastings. He was on the board before he moved. Said you gave a green light. He even said you were eager to be part of the community plan. I didn't even know a Greg Hastings. She handed me a copy of the so-called minutes, printed on thick paper, signed by someone who had scribbled what looked vaguely like my name. My real signature wasn't even close. You're trying to pass this off as legal? Karen smiled. It's already been built. Do you really want to go through the mess of trying to undo it all? That seems counterproductive. I folded the paper and slid it into my pocket. You have no idea what I'm willing to undo. I didn't sleep that night. My mind spun in tight, angry circles. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Karen's smug face, heard that condescending tone dripping with fake diplomacy. Do you really want to go through the mess? She'd said. No, I needed too. So the next morning, before the sun even broke over the rooftops, I was at the county recorder's office. The clerk behind the desk, an older guy named Stan, raised an eyebrow when I dropped my folder on the counter. Morning, I said, voice tight. I need the original deed for parcel 42B in Suncrest, and anything tied to recent zoning changes. He shuffled papers, muttered about coffee, and disappeared into the back. 15 minutes later, he returned with a stack of documents that made my stomach churn. My dad's signature on the deed, clear as day. Date of transfer, legal boundaries, and stamped, clean across the top, privately owned, non-HOA. No mention of annexation, no zoning variance, no permits issued. But what really caught my eye was a highlighted section on the zoning file. Residential usage only, no commercial or storage development permitted without public hearing and formal reclassification. That hearing never happened. No notices had gone out. No signatures collected. They'd built a mini storage facility in broad daylight, without a single scrap of legal right to do so. Stan leaned on the counter. You said storage units are on that lot now? He asked slowly. 25 of them, I replied. With security cameras, floodlights, the whole package. He gave a low whistle. Somebody skipped a few steps. Try all of them. I took copies of everything: deed, zoning ordinances, land use restrictions, and slid them into my case file. On the way home, I stopped by the city planning office just to double check. Same story. No record of any permit application, no zoning request, nothing but silence on paper where there should have been meetings, votes, approvals. Karen hadn't just played dirty. She'd played stupid and arrogant. Because if there's one thing my line of work teaches you, it's that structures built without the proper foundation, they never last. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I knew two things for certain. One, the storage units were illegal. And two, I wasn't just going to fight this. I was going to bury it. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. At first, it was subtle, strange glances from neighbors who'd once waved without thinking. Then came the long pauses in conversation when I walked by, the forced smiles that vanished the second I turned my back. Karen was doing what people like her do best, turning the story upside down and feeding it to anyone who'd listen. At the hardware store, I overheard a woman mutter something about greedy landowners. At the diner, the waitress who used to chat about my dad's old Dodge wouldn't even make eye contact. And when I walked past the community garden one morning, I caught two men talking just a little too loud. Some people will do anything for a payout, even destroy a whole neighborhood. Karen had planted the idea like a weed, and just like that, it started to spread. She framed it perfectly. I was the outsider now, the guy trying to profit by tearing down a community asset. She claimed I'd promised the land for HOA use years ago, that I'd agreed in spirit if not in ink. She told them I was holding the neighborhood hostage until I got a cash settlement, that I wanted to replace the storage units with a billboard lot, or worse, lease the land to a chain store. None of it was true, but the truth didn't matter when the lie was more dramatic. She even went as far as suggesting that I'd been kicked off the HOA registry years ago for aggressive behavior. Whatever that meant. I'd never been part of their board. Never wanted to be. But facts weren't part of Karen's game. Perception was. One neighbor, Mr. Kinley, a retiree who used to chat with me about classic cars, avoided my eyes when we crossed paths. His words were clipped. "Just settle it quietly, son. No need to stir up trouble." Trouble. That's what Karen was calling this now. Asterisk. Me. Asterisk. The guy who owned the land, the guy who was the victim of unauthorized construction, was now being painted as the villain. The greedy, angry man standing in the way of progress. But what Karen didn't realize was that gaslighting only works if the other person doesn't keep receipts. And I had a whole binder full. The letter was simple. One page, direct, professional, and stamped with my company's legal letterhead. Asterisk. Asterisk, cease and desist. Plain as day in bold print. I slid it into a clear document sleeve, taped it dead center on the first storage unit door. The metal was still warm from the afternoon sun, smooth and unscuffed. Like everything else on my property, it was new, unearned, and not theirs. I stood there a moment, arms crossed, watching the wind tug at the paper's corners. It felt good. Not as satisfying as bulldozing the whole setup into a fine powder, but good in the way a first chess move feels. A warning, loud and clear. By the time I returned from running errands a few hours later, the sleeve was gone. No trace of it. Not a scrap of tape left behind, like it had never existed. I pulled out my phone, opened the camera roll, and checked the photo I took before leaving. Time-stamped, documented. The words were still burned into my memory. You are hereby notified that the structures placed on Parcel 42B are unauthorized and in violation of municipal code. Remove all improvements within 7 days or face legal action. Now, nothing. Just clean steel doors and a fresh silence that hung heavy in the air. I glanced around the lot. The security camera I'd noticed earlier was still pointed my way, motionless, watching. I waved. I wanted whoever was behind that lens to know I saw them too. The next morning I got a call from a blocked number. I let it ring. Then again, 10 minutes later. I picked up the third time. A clipped female voice. "Mr. Carter, we received your message." "And?" I said. "It was unnecessary. You're only making this harder for everyone involved." I didn't respond. There are residents relying on those units now. Displacing them could reflect very poorly on you in this community. I let the silence stretch. Then I said, 7 days. She hung up. It didn't take a genius to guess who was on the other end of that call. Karen had seen the letter all right. And instead of backing off, She was doubling down, turning my land grab into some kind of emotional hostage situation. They wanted to erase my voice, pretend I didn't exist. But they were about to learn my work starts with removal. The city planner's office was tucked behind a strip mall, sandwiched between a nail salon and a dry cleaner that hadn't been open in months. It didn't exactly scream authority, but I knew better. If you wanted the truth about what was and wasn't legal in this town, this was where it lived. Inside, it smelled like printer toner and burnt coffee. A young guy behind the counter looked up as I stepped in, his expression flickering from bored to curious when he saw the folder tucked under my arm. "You hear about the Suncrest build?" he asked before I even spoke. That caught me off guard. "Yeah, how'd you know?" He smirked and tilted his head toward a growing stack of papers beside the printer. "You're not the first one asking questions. A couple of neighbors came in last week, but none of them had any real claim to the land. You look like you do." I slid my ID and deed copy across the counter. "I do." He studied the documents for a moment, then motioned for me to follow him to a back room. We passed rows of filing cabinets and faded zoning maps until he stopped at a workstation and tapped his keyboard. "Okay, so according to our system, their asterisk was asterisk, a permit application filed under the Suncrest HOA's name 3 months ago." He clicked through a few more screens, then frowned. "This is weird. What?" "They submitted a request for community structure, but the attached documents are off." He pulled up a scanned image. "See that?" I leaned in. It was a blurry copy of a supposed approval letter. The city logo was smudged, and the signature at the bottom didn't match the clerk's name I'd spoken to weeks ago. "That's not an official seal," he added. "And this guy," he pointed to the signature, "doesn't even work here." "You're saying they forged it?" He nodded slowly. "Looks that way." I felt a slow burn rise up in my chest. "Has this been reported?" He shrugged. "Not officially. Most people just assume if a project's done, it had to be approved. It's rare someone pushes back." I clenched my jaw. Karen hadn't just pushed the line. She'd stomped all over it and hoped no one would look down. But I was looking now, and I wasn't blinking. It was standing room only in the community hall, the air thick with forced civility and barely contained irritation. Neighbors packed the folding chairs in neat little rows, sipping lukewarm coffee from HOA-branded paper cups. Karen stood at the front like a queen before her court, flanked by the remaining board members, each one either cowed into silence or too comfortable riding her coattails to speak up. I hadn't planned on attending, but after what I found at the city planner's office, I wanted to see how far down the rabbit hole this went. I stood in the back, arms crossed, clipboard tucked under one arm. I was the only one not smiling. Karen adjusted the microphone and tapped it twice. "Thank you all for being here. As most of you know, there have been concerns raised about the Suncrest storage expansion project." She glanced over the crowd, pretending not to see me. "In response, we've compiled the official meeting notes and records for full transparency." She held up a binder, thick with pages and plastic sleeves, the kind of thing that looks legitimate if you don't read too closely. Included are notes from the October 12th planning session, during which Mr. Carter, she paused, letting the name hang in the air, offered verbal approval for the storage unit placement. All eyes turned to me. I didn't flinch. "Would you like to come up and clarify, Mr. Carter?" she asked sweetly, though the glint in her eyes said she hoped I wouldn't. I stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "Sure." I took the binder from her, flipped it open to the tab marked asterisk October 12, asterisk, and read. Mr. Carter expressed enthusiasm for the project, stating he was happy to contribute land to support HOA growth. My voice echoed across the room. "Interesting," I said, "because on October 12th I was in Albuquerque, demolishing a textile plant. I've got hotel receipts, crew rosters, and a time-stamped flight log. I wasn't even in the state." Karen's smile twitched but didn't fade. "Perhaps there was a miscommunication." "No," I said, closing the binder with a sharp snap. "There's fabrication, which is fraud. You're not just trespassing, you're doing it with paperwork you made up." Murmurs rippled through the room. Karen cleared her throat. "Let's not turn this into a legal battle." "Too late," I said, locking eyes with her. "You already did. They didn't come to my door in daylight. They waited until the sun dipped behind the rooftops when lawnmowers stopped humming and porch lights blinked on one by one like cautious winks. The first was Mrs. Callahan from 2 streets over. She walked her dog past my house twice before finally stopping at the edge of my driveway, pretending to adjust the leash. "I'm not staying long," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "Just wanted to say, be careful." I stepped out onto the porch. "Careful?" She nodded, eyes darting. Karen doesn't take kindly to being challenged. My cousin got fined for a garden gnome after he questioned her about HOA fees. Another neighbor had a 6-foot privacy fence approved by the last board. Karen said it was out of compliance and made him tear it down. I didn't say anything, just listened. "She'll make you look like the problem," Mrs. Callahan added, lowering her voice. "Then she'll start the paper trail, violations, late fees, liens." One guy tried to fight her in court, ended up with daily fines until he sold his house. By the end of the week, I'd heard 3 more stories just like it, people coming to me in private, their words trembling with a fear that had nothing to do with laws and everything to do with power. One woman left a note in my mailbox without a name, warning me to check my tires every morning. "She has people who do her dirty work," the note said. "You'll never see it coming." Even folks I'd grown up with. People who'd known my father, who once sat at our kitchen table for coffee, were now avoiding me in public. A neighbor who used to wave from her garden crossed the street when I approached. Mr. Kinley, the classic car guy, suddenly didn't have time to talk about engines. It wasn't hostility I saw on their faces, it was fear. Karen had built something stronger than fences and bylaws. She'd built a climate, one where people would rather stay silent than be next. And now they were watching me, waiting to see what I'd do. If I backed down, I'd become another cautionary tale. But if I pushed forward, I'd become something they hadn't seen before. Someone who pushed asterisk back asterisk. I woke to the sound of metal grinding gravel, low, slow, and purposeful. The kind of sound that doesn't belong outside your house unless you're the one making it. I pulled back the curtain, and there it was. A full-size yellow bulldozer parked squarely across my easement, not blocking it. Asterisk, asterisk, sitting asterisk, asterisk on it. Its blade rested inches from my mailbox, angled like it was daring me to come closer. The engine was off, but the message was loud and clear. This wasn't a mistake. This was a move. I stepped outside, still barefoot, coffee burning my palm. A man in a reflective vest stood near the cab, arms folded. Not doing anything, not fixing anything, just watching. "You lost?" I called out. He didn't respond, just stared. I walked around the machine slowly, eyeing the fresh tire marks carved into the shoulder. The thing had been backed in tight, like it was meant to wedge itself between my property and the road. A barrier, a warning. Karen's SUV pulled up not 5 minutes later. She stepped out like she'd been waiting for her entrance, sunglasses on, clipboard in hand. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she said, all sweet pleasantry, like we were neighbors discussing weather. "Just a minor utility access project. The board approved temporary staging in the easement zone, perfectly within our rights." "Except it's asterisk, my asterisk easement," I replied. She tilted her head. "The HOA has shared rights over utility access points, and since the board determined additional drainage upgrades were needed, well, you know how it is. These machines have to go asterisk somewhere." Asterisk. I stared at her for a long second. "You want me to believe that you just happened to need a bulldozer parked here, on my property, the week after I served you a cease and desist?" She smiled tightly. "Coincidences happen." The man in the vest chuckled under his breath. Karen gave him a sharp look, and he walked off like a dog called to heel. I didn't say another word. I didn't move the dozer. I didn't threaten, yell, or argue. I just took out my phone and filmed every square inch of it. Make, model, plate, timestamp. Then I walked back inside and started drafting the letter. Not a cease and desist this time. A formal notice of trespass, with pictures, with county codes, and with one very clear message. You want to play games with bulldozers? You're messing with the wrong guy. I own them. It was a coincidence, or maybe fate, that I ran into Danny at the gas station just outside town. We'd served together on a volunteer crew back in high school before he'd gone full-time with the fire department and I got into demolition. He spotted me first, hollering across the pumps with a grin that made him look younger than he was. After a handshake and a quick catch-up, he nodded toward my truck. "Heard you've been stirring up the HOA hornet's nest. Karen's been squawking about you at every community fire safety meeting." Yeah, well, I said, she built 25 illegal storage units on my land and tried to fake my signature. That'll ruffle feathers. Danny whistled low. Didn't know it was asterisk your asterisk lot. That explains the attitude. He paused, eyes narrowing. You got time for a coffee? There's something I want to show you. 10 minutes later, we were sitting in the firehouse break room. Danny pulled out a thick red binder and set it on the table between us. Complaint log. We keep one for every development in our jurisdiction. Look here, Suncrest HOA, last 6 months. I flipped through the pages. Electrical issues, blocked access points, improper ventilation in detached structures. Every report logged against a new HOA installation, none of which had gone through proper inspection. Storage units show up here? I asked. Danny tapped a line near the bottom. Yep, neighbor reported diesel fumes from units 3 and 4. Said they were being used as workshops, maybe even vehicle storage. That's a fire risk. I sent a team out, but by the time we got there, the units were empty and locked. Karen told us it was a false report. And that's it? I asked. Danny frowned. Well, not quite. We filed a follow-up request for inspection access and never heard back. A week later, Karen called my chief directly, said we were harassing her community. I sat back, the weight of it all sinking in. She's been doing this everywhere, hasn't she? Skipping permits, pushing construction, then stonewalling anyone who asks questions. Danny gave a slow nod. I can't say it officially, but yeah, you're not the first one she stepped on, just the first one who might have the leverage to push back. I closed the binder carefully. Then maybe it's time someone did. He smiled. Just be careful. Karen's smart, but scared people with power? They get sloppy. I left with copies of the reports, a full tank of gas, and something I hadn't had in weeks. Proof I wasn't the only one. She'd crossed. I wasn't invited, of course. The flyer had gone out to select residents only, concerned homeowners, Karen called them, but a neighbor slipped one into my mailbox anonymously. The edges folded, like it had been passed hand to hand before reaching me. HOA Town Hall, urgent discussion regarding neighborhood property disputes. I parked 2 blocks away and walked in through the side door of the community center just as Karen took the podium. The room was full, packed shoulder to shoulder with nervous residents and board members, all pretending not to notice the tension in the air. Karen wore her usual, pristine smile, hair tied back so tight it looked painful. I want to thank everyone for coming, she said smoothly, hands clasped, like a benevolent queen. There's been a great deal of confusion regarding our newest storage development project. Some unfortunate misinformation has been circulating, and I think it's time we address it directly. I stepped forward before she could continue. All eyes turned to me as my boots echoed across the tile. Karen's smile faltered for a second, but she recovered fast. Mr. Carter, she said tightly, this is a private HOA meeting. I held up the documents in my hand, official zoning maps from the county and a packet of demolition permits, stamped and signed. And this is a public zoning violation. Your project is built on land that doesn't belong to you, with permits that were never filed and under a false claim of verbal approval from someone who was out of state at the time. I walked to the front and laid the papers on the table. Here are the original zoning maps, the ones you tried to alter. And here, I flipped the next page, are my demolition permits, approved by the county just yesterday. Because unlike you, I went through the proper channels. Gasps spread across the room like a wave. One man stood up in the back. Wait, so it's asterisk his asterisk land? The whole thing? I nodded. Every inch. Karen opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. For the first time since I'd met her, she didn't have a prepared answer. Just silence, followed by the sound of residents whispering, shifting in their seats, glancing at her like something cracked had finally shown through the gloss. I didn't need to say anything else. The truth had walked into the room, and she hadn't prepared for that. The envelope came by courier, not regular mail. Thick cardstock, sealed with unnecessary formality. It arrived the morning after the meeting, as if Karen had stayed up all night trying to reassert control in the only language she truly spoke. Paper, pressure, and pretense. Inside was a notice of a temporary restraining order, filed against me by the Suncrest Homeowners Association, on behalf of terrified residents who claimed I was threatening to demolish their homes and endanger the safety of the neighborhood. The language was dramatic. Phrases like emotional duress, physical intimidation, and abuse of occupational authority littered the pages. According to the document, my very presence was destabilizing the community. The part that really stuck out? Mr. Carter's known ownership of a demolition company has caused residents to fear he may take unlawful action at any time. I laughed out loud reading that one. Karen wasn't just reaching, she was flailing. Still, the implications were serious. If the order held, I wouldn't be allowed within 500 feet of my own land, which in effect gave her and her board carte blanche to continue using it however they pleased. I called my attorney, a sharp-minded woman named Regina who'd handled land disputes for bigger sharks than Karen. She barely finished skimming the packet before scoffing. This is noise, a stall tactic. She's trying to delay enforcement on the demolition permits, make you look like the aggressor. She's painting me as unstable. She's painting you as dangerous, Regina said, which is ironic considering she built on your land illegally. By that afternoon, I was served again, this time by a private security guard wearing a knockoff uniform with a stitched HOA patch that looked like it had been printed at a copy shop. He handed me another letter, then wordlessly backed away, like I might explode. The letter was from Karen herself. Thinly veiled threats dressed up in legalese, requests for continued negotiations if I agreed to stand down for the good of the community. I tossed it into the shredder. She thought she could push me into a corner, make me look like the villain in a story she wrote herself. But the thing about villains? They don't come armed with maps, permits, and county seals. They come armed with lies, and mine were all filed in triplicate. The sky was still bruised with the last hints of night when the first truck rolled in. Big diesel engine rumbling low, headlights cutting through the early morning fog, then another, then a third. My crew, 6 men I trusted with more than just heavy machinery, climbed out, hard hats on, work gloves already in place. No words were needed. They knew what today was. I stood at the edge of the lot, boots planted in the same soil my father once tilled by hand, watching as the yellow machines took their positions like silent giants. Hydraulic arms, precision treads, steel teeth, tools of destruction, yes, but today they were instruments of justice. Across the street, neighbors began to emerge from their homes, coffee mugs in hand, faces pressed to windows. A few stepped onto their porches, unsure whether to watch or hide. Karen's house remained dark, curtains drawn, but I knew she was watching. She'd feel this more than any lawsuit ever could. A Channel 9 news van pulled up, camera crew unloading with quiet urgency. The reporter, a young woman with a quick stride and an even quicker mic, made her way toward me. "Mr. Carter," she said, eyes wide, "are you really going to demolish the HOA's storage units?" I held up a copy of the permit. They were built illegally, on land I own, with forged records. What I'm doing here isn't demolition, it's restoration. Her camera crew set up. The lights blinked on. That's when Karen finally appeared, storming across the street in a silk robe and slippers like this was just another petty dispute she could shut down with a few well-placed threats. "You can't do this," she shouted. "We filed a restraining order. This is a peaceful community." I didn't respond. I didn't have to. Regina, my lawyer, stepped forward and handed her a folder. The restraining order was vacated yesterday in circuit court. The county has issued full authorization to remove unauthorized structures. Any attempt to interfere will be considered obstruction. Karen opened the folder, her face whitening with each page. I turned to my foreman and nodded once. The machines roared to life. As the first storage unit collapsed with a thunderous crack, dust rising into the pink morning light, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Stillness. Not triumph, not revenge. Just the quiet weight of something wrong being put right, one wall at a time. The first 2 units came down clean, metal walls peeled open like soda cans, nothing inside but dust and stale insulation. But by the third, my foreman waved me over, his face tense beneath the brim of his hard hat. "Mike," he said quietly, "you're going to want to see this." Inside, behind the sheetrock and fake wall panels, was a maze of industrial shelving, sealed crates stacked from floor to ceiling, each marked with blank shipping labels and barcodes that didn't trace back to any local registry. No personal belongings, no holiday decorations or lawnmowers, just containers. Cold, silent, anonymous. One of the crates had already cracked open from the collapse. I reached in, pulled out a small shrink-wrapped bundle. Tools. Dozens of them. High-end construction-grade power tools, unregistered, untraceable. Some were still tagged with theft prevention clips, as if they'd been plucked right off hardware store shelves. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just illegal development, it was a storage front, a shell. I backed out of the unit and turned to my crew. "Nobody touches anything else. Call the sheriff, now." By the time law enforcement arrived, 4 more units had revealed similar secrets: equipment, electronics, even cases of contractor-grade wiring and copper spools. Karen's precious community storage was nothing more than a warehouse for stolen goods. Sheriff Dawson stepped out of his cruiser, jaw tight as he walked through the wreckage. "You said this was HOA-controlled property?" "No," I said, handing him the permit and the deed again. "It's mine. They built here illegally, and now we know why." He radioed for backup. Within minutes, deputies were marking off the lot with caution tape, snapping photos, logging evidence. I could see neighbors gathering across the street, their curiosity turning to confusion as officers rolled out boxes and taped off the area. Then Karen appeared again. No robe this time, just sunglasses and a forced smile that cracked at the edges. "This is a misunderstanding," she told the sheriff. "Those units were rented. We have contracts." Dawson didn't even look at her. "Then you'll have no problem showing us the paperwork." She hesitated. Just long enough. That was the moment I knew she hadn't just trespassed. She'd built an operation on land she didn't own, thinking no one would look too closely. But I had. And now everyone else was, too. The first clue came from a power bill. One of my crew handed it to me after tearing down the 3rd storage unit. "Thought you might want to see this," he said, handing over a crumpled envelope that had been shoved behind a breaker box. It wasn't addressed to the HOA. It was addressed to a company I'd never heard of. West Point Logistics, LLC, with Karen Whitaker listed as the billing contact. A logistics company operating out of storage units on my land? I knew what that meant before I even pulled the rest of the paperwork from the rubble. Inside one of the units, buried beneath a false floor, we found several crates wrapped in thick black plastic. My guys backed off the moment I peeled one open. Rows of electronics, shrink-wrapped, no serial numbers, clearly unregistered. I called Regina first, then Danny. By noon, the FBI had boots on site. Turns out the storage units weren't just an HOA amenity. They were part of a side hustle Karen had been running for over a year, illegally leasing space to unregistered vendors, using HOA funds to construct the units, and laundering the income through a shell company registered in her brother-in-law's name. When I handed the agents the forged HOA meeting minutes, doctored zoning approvals, and the fake restraining order, their eyes lit up like they'd struck gold. "This isn't just a zoning violation," one of them said, flipping through my binder. "This is wire fraud, misappropriation of community funds, real estate fraud, and possibly racketeering." They raided the HOA office that afternoon. Karen wasn't home when the agents arrived, but she wasn't far. They found her in a nail salon 3 blocks over, mid-manicure, barking at someone on speakerphone. She didn't go quietly. She threw the kind of fit you only see from people who've never been told no in their lives. But the cuffs still clicked shut. Neighbors came out in clumps as the news spread. People who had once avoided my eye now watched in stunned silence as Karen was loaded into the back of a black SUV. Her empire, built on fear, intimidation, and falsified paperwork, was crumbling faster than the units we'd just knocked down. And all I had to do was shine a little light on it. The vote didn't take place in some grand meeting hall or polished boardroom. It happened under string lights in the community park, just 3 weeks after Karen was escorted away in handcuffs. Someone brought folding chairs, others brought crock pots and paper plates. Kids ran barefoot through the grass while adults circled clipboards and ballots. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like a neighborhood. People were still raw. Some embarrassed for being fooled, others angry they'd stayed silent for so long. But beneath it all was a quiet relief. The fear was gone. The whispers had stopped. Karen's empire, built on threats and false authority, was dust, and in its place, something new was starting to grow. The motion was simple: dissolve the existing HOA charter, release all remaining board members, and establish a new resident-led council with transparent rules, term limits, and financial accountability. The vote was nearly unanimous. I wasn't even in the initial nominations, but my name kept coming up. People walked over to thank me, clap me on the shoulder, ask if I'd consider leading the transition. At first, I hesitated. I never asked to be anyone's spokesperson. I just wanted my land back. But then I looked around, at the families carrying lawn chairs, at the elderly couple who once avoided me now laughing beside a group of teenagers, at the woman who used to glare at me from behind her blinds now handing me a slice of pie. This place had changed, and maybe I had too. When the final votes were tallied, I stood under the park pavilion, the same spot Karen used to bark orders from. But I didn't bring a clipboard, I brought a promise. No more secret meetings, no more fines for holiday lights or lawn chairs. We're not here to control each other. We're here to live together. There were no cheers, no applause, just nods. Real ones. People weren't looking for a savior. They were looking for something steady, and for the first time, I felt like I could be that. As the sun dipped low and porch lights blinked on one by one, I looked out at this community, scarred, bruised, but still standing. We weren't just fixing broken bylaws. We were building something worth belonging to. The lot was empty again, no storage units, no fencing, no false promises or hidden crates. Just soil, open sky, and the same quiet hum of wind my father used to call the sound of ownership. I stood at the edge of it with my boots in the dirt, remembering the way he used to walk the property at sunset, hands in his pockets, head down like he was listening to something only he could hear. For weeks after the vote, people asked what I planned to do with the land. Sell it? Develop it? Lease it back to the community? Everyone assumed I'd cash in now that Karen was gone and the property had been cleared. But money was never the point. This lot was my inheritance, not just by law, but by spirit. My dad never had much, but he always believed in building something that could outlast you, something that made life better for the people who came after, so that's what I decided to do. We broke ground on a new community center that fall. Nothing flashy, steel beams, big windows, lots of natural light. A place where kids could do homework, seniors could gather without being fined for walking too slow, and neighbors could finally meet without fear of being out of compliance. We designed it ourselves. The carpenter down the street donated time. A retired architect from 2 blocks over dusted off her drafting table. It was built by hands that lived here, not by contractors who couldn't find our street on a map. The day we poured the foundation, I stood beside the mixer and pressed a copper penny into the wet concrete. One from the year my dad bought the lot. Just a small thing, but one that would stay buried beneath every potluck, every book club, every community meeting held under that roof. I didn't need a statue or plaque. I didn't need a street named after me. All I wanted was to create something real, something that stood where lies once did. And as the walls of the center rose, brick by brick, I felt something I hadn't felt since this all started. Peace. Not the kind that comes from silence, but the kind that comes from rebuilding, from taking back what was yours, not to destroy, but to share. That was my father's legacy. And now, finally, it was mine too.